Thank you, first of all, Mayor Parker, for your leadership. No matter how many good headlines I get, I always feel like I'm the lesser of two mayors when we're on the same program. And thank you so much for the chance to be here. Actually, in the spirit of thanks, since this delicious lunch is coming out, let's thank the waitstaff here at the hotel who are doing such a great job. And thanks to everyone who is part of Victory for the work that you do to advance the cause of equality in our country through LGBTQ representation in our national political life. It is so moving, having been at this same event a couple years ago, to see Danica Rome again, who was running at the time, and who wins, by the way, because of a laser-like focus on the needs of her constituents. She saw me across the room, she bounded up to me, and these are the words that really warm a mayor's heart. She says, "I got to talk to you about something. Integrated stormwater management. What are you doing in South Bend?" And to see what has become possible in 2 short years, that as Mayor Parker said, we've quadrupled the number of elected officials in state houses who are openly trans, and that's just the beginning. To see what just happened up the road from South Bend with Lori Lightfoot becoming mayor. To see an out gay governor in the state of Colorado. To see an out bisexual legislator on stage here with Katie Hill and so many others that it is literally impossible to name, and that's a very good thing, because that means we're getting somewhere, but we're not there yet. My name is Pete Buttigieg, for understandable reasons, better known as Mayor Pete, and lately, I think still better known as the husband of Chasten Buttigieg. Chasten and I have been having a pretty good year so far. I'm not surprised that our message is resonating. I've always believed in our message, but I'd be lying if I didn't admit to you that I'm a little surprised by the trajectory that we're on, by the speed of it. But then again, nothing is more common to the American political experience than watching things change quickly, for better and for worse, and very often for better. Just look at some of the things that have changed since the beginning of this decade, when I was first running for mayor of my hometown, or since the beginning of my adult life as an awkward 18-year-old walking the halls of St. Joseph High School. Because back then I would have believed that you could either be gay or you could be married, but not both, not where I lived. That if you were gay, you could either be out or you could run for office, but not both. That in our country, you could live with a same-sex spouse or you could serve in the military, but not both. As a kid, I was hoping one day I'd be an astronaut and travel to outer space. But no way would I have believed that one fine day in the spring of 2019, I would be standing in a ballroom in Washington, 37 years old, a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, in my 8th year as mayor of my hometown, a couple hours after going on Meet the Press as a credible contender for the American presidency, with my husband looking on from his table. It's amazing what's changed just in my young lifetime. Since announcing my exploratory committee in January, I've done countless interviews on the historic implications of a potential out candidate, on what it could mean to have a same-sex first family, on whether America is ready for a gay president. And I've given just as many interviews where it didn't even come up, because sexual orientation was not considered one of the most unusual or important things to discuss with me in the context of the 2020 race. And that in itself is historic in a way. When I came out in 2015, it was for the simple reason that I was finally ready. I had been wrestling with my sexuality for years. And if I had not deployed to Afghanistan, I might never have found the courage to come out. But there's something that happens to you when you write a letter and put it in an envelope and write "just in case" on the outside and leave it where your family can find it if they have to. It forces you to realize that you only get one life. You only get to be one person. And so I knew when I did come home safely in 2014 that it was just going to be a matter of time. Inconveniently, that time came in the middle of my re-election campaign. It came while Mike Pence was governor of Indiana. And since there had never been an out-elected executive in our state, no one was sure what the effect would be on my future. Would people in our socially conservative community embrace me and continue to judge me based on the job that I did for them? Or would they turn on me, unable to look past the fact that who I was something they had been brought up to reject? There was only one way to find out for sure. So I wrote an op-ed for the newspaper, waited to see what would happen. And to make a very long story short, what happened was that re-election night where we got 80% of the vote. I got a lot of questions about why I came out when I did, whether it was designed to serve some purpose. In fact, it was designed to serve a very simple and private purpose, which was I wanted to start dating. When I turned 33, I was a grown man, well-traveled, well-educated, sitting mayor, and a war veteran with absolutely no idea what it was like to be in love. And I wasn't sure how to get started either. So I did what people my age do, use the internet. I got friends to help me pick out the right photos, set up online profiles, started lining up dates. One day I was skimming through profiles on an app, possibly not the app you're thinking of. It's not important which app. But I looked at that little screen on my phone and I saw this smile, this guy. And I clicked the button on the right because I had to meet him. And one of the best things about these last couple months has been watching America meet him too and start to fall for Chasten just like I did. And I think you ought to stand up for a minute because he's right there. Now, I've told that story in a lot more detail in my book, which I'm hoping you'll pick up because it's kind of how we're paying off the wedding bills. It's a really happy story in the end, for all its ups and downs. But there's another part of the story that, frankly, even now, I have a harder time talking about. I think because it's hard to admit. I'm uncomfortable admitting it even now, even though it's something that maybe won't be so surprising. And it's the fact that when I was younger, I would have done anything to not be gay. When I began to halfway realize what it meant that I felt the way I did about people I saw in the hallway at school or the dining hall in college, it launched in me something I can only describe as a kind of war. And if that war had been settled on the terms that I would have wished for when I was 15 or 20 or frankly even 25, I would not be standing here. If you had offered me a pill to make me straight, I would have swallowed it before you had time to give me a sip of water. It is a hard thing to think about now. It's hard to face the truth that there were times in my life when if you had shown me exactly what it was inside me that made me gay, I would have cut it out with a knife. And the reason it's so awful to think about isn't just the knowledge that so many young people struggling to come to terms with their sexuality or their gender identity do just that. They harm themselves, figuratively or literally. But the real reason that it's so hard to think about is if I had the chance to do that, I would never have found my way to Chasten. That the best thing in my life, my marriage, might not have happened at all. My marriage, this thing I can't even describe without going into cliches. Like talking about how my world went from black and white to color the moment we held hands toward the end of our first date. The thing that made it possible for me to get through the loss of my father this year. This man who lifted up not just me, but Dad and Mom through those last awful days. How dark the thought that the man that I admire and care about and love sharing with the rest of the country. And even more importantly, can't wait to share one day with raising children. Might not have been part of my life at all. Thank God there was no pill. Thank God there was no knife. People talk about things like marriage equality as a moral issue. And it is certainly a moral issue as far as I'm concerned. It's a moral issue because being married to Chasten has made me a better human being. Because it has made me more compassionate, more understanding, more self-aware, and more decent. My marriage to Chasten has made me a better man. And yes, Mr. Vice President, it has moved me closer to God. You may be religious and you may not. But if you are, and you are also queer, and you have come through the other side of a period of wishing that you weren't, then you know that that message, that this idea that there is something wrong with you, is a message that puts you at war not only with yourself, but with your Maker. And speaking only for myself, I can tell you that if me being gay was a choice, it was a choice that was made far, far above my pay grade. And that's the thing I wish the Mike Pences of the world would understand. That if you got a problem with who I am, your problem is not with me. Your quarrel, sir, is with my Creator. So back to the happy part. Like I said, we got married in June at our church. It's a beautiful ceremony, full of family and friends, people Chasten grew up with, people I served with in the military, and I'm so mindful and so thankful that every minute of that marriage, we're enjoying a freedom that came to us because of the work of people like the people in this room. People who saw to it that the cause of LGBTQ equality, that LGBTQ representation was advanced year by year by year. And that's why I stand here not just as a politician who has benefited from the support of the Victory Fund, but as a loving husband saying thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do in this struggle to bring us all that freedom. And we know that struggle's not over just because marriage equality has come to the land. The struggle is not over when several states in this country, including my own home state of Indiana, don't even have hate crimes legislation. The struggle's not over when in so many parts of our country it's perfectly legal to fire somebody because of who they are or who they love. It must change, and that's why we need a president prepared to sign a Federal Equality Act right away. Struggle is not over when transgender troops, ready to put their lives on the line for this country, have their careers threatened with ruin one tweet at a time by a commander-in-chief who himself pretended to be disabled in order to get out of serving when it was his turn. Struggle's not over for our community by a long shot. And it is part of a struggle for freedom and fairness and a better life that goes far beyond the LGBTQ experience. Every American struggles in some way to experience true freedom. And as I contemplate a presidential campaign and speak out about these issues across the country, the thing I'm most hoping to change is the way that my party talks about our values. Because there's no secret Democrats are policy people. We are nuanced people. We're quick with the 14-point plan and the PowerPoint deck. Sometimes a bit slower to explain the values that motivate our policies. So it's time for us to get back into the business of talking about values, especially freedom. My party has allowed conservatives to monopolize the language of freedom because they're so interested in freedom from government, freedom from regulation, freedom from taxes, that they can forget about the other things besides government that can make you unfree. Freedom isn't just about freedom from. It's about freedom to. Not just freedom from regulation, but freedom to live a life of your choosing. And the LGBTQ experience is a prime example of why that matters. Because you're just not free if a county clerk gets to tell you who you ought to marry because of their interpretation of their religion. Just like you're not free if you're unable to start a new business because leaving your old job means losing your health care. Or if your reproductive health choices are being dictated by a male boss or a politician. So I want to see our country talking, our party talking a lot more about freedom and democracy and security, which, by the way, in the 21st century is an awful lot more complex than putting up a wall from sea to shining sea. We need a new vocabulary and a new bold vision, and the big idea of my entering the 2020 conversation is that the best way to get a new vocabulary for our values is to elevate a new generation of leaders. I was in high school when Columbine happened. I belonged to the school shooting generation, the generation that provided most of the troops for the conflicts after 9/11, the one that's going to be on the business end of climate change for the rest of our lives, and could be the first in American history to be worse off than our parents economically by the time I reach the current age of the current president in 2054. I always love letting that sink in for a second. Everyone in our generation, just like anyone who's ever packed their bags on the order of a president and gone overseas, anybody whose marriage has depended on a single vote in the U.S. Supreme Court, everybody in our generation knows that politics isn't theoretical, it is personal. And it's at that personal level that politics can make such a big difference in our lives, a bad one or a very good one. Because my generation is also the first to know marriage equality is the law of the land for the majority of our adult lives. That didn't just happen. That was the result of political struggle, moral struggle, struggle by people with the courage to make change and bend the arc of history in the direction of justice. And that personal struggle for millions of Americans will be just a little easier when they see themselves represented at every level of political leadership, and I mean every level, thanks to support from people like you. So here we are. It's 2019, America's in big trouble, and we need a fresh start. And yet I am as optimistic as ever, because, as every candidate who's been supported by this effort knows, candidates who often made a difference whether they won or not, just by being on that ballot, made a difference before the first vote was cast. Running for office, at the end of the day, is an act of hope. So, next time a reporter asks me if America is ready for a gay president, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to give them the only answer that I can think of that's honest, and it's this. I trust my fellow Americans, but at the end of the day, there's exactly one way to find out for sure. Thank you. Thank you, and I'll see you on the trail.